Hello everyone, thank you to everyone who has joined us today. So today's webinar will focus on how we're looking to our contractors and their subcontractors to help us deliver on our commitments to being a good neighbour to the communities along the line of the new railway. So our direct contractors will have requirements and commitments that they'll be looking for from suppliers to help them achieve some of their commitments around community engagement. And so it's important that your business can showcase how you can help them with their aspirations. So we hope today that you find the session helpful. So just to introduce myself, my name's Victoria Roberts. I'm the Business Engagement Manager at HS2, and I'll be hosting and facilitating the Q&A today. So I'm joined today by HS2 expert Natalie, who is our Head of Strategy and Community Engagement, and she'll be guiding us through our aspirations and commitments around being a good neighbour. So before I pass over to Natalie to get us started off, I just wanted to run through some general points. So we know you're all busy, so we'll be keeping this session to 45 minutes, but we will be sharing a recording and a copy of the presentation and any key links to documents and information that we mention following the event. So we also know that IT troubles are something that a lot of us have experienced during the current situation. So I'd advise that if you do become disconnected, just leave the event and rejoin, and you'll start where you left off, so you won't actually miss anything. We've muted all your microphones, but you can participate through the Q&A panel on the right-hand side of your screen. So I'd encourage you to get your questions in early. They'll come through to me, and it will cover as many as we can at the end of the session. And those that we don't get time to go through, we'll make sure we follow up after the event and give you the answers that you're looking for. You can also like the other attendees' questions, so some of the most popular ones we'll try and make sure that we answer those ones. Just before we get started, I also want to make sure that we let you know about our next Work With Us webinar. So that's going to be on health and safety, and again it will be looking at some of the requirements and commitments that we are looking for from our suppliers. So again, a really important topic for us at HS2, and something that is really important, that when you're looking to bid for work, you are able to showcase providing that support to us in achieving our aspirations. And then finally, your feedback is really important to us. So after the session, we'll send around a short feedback form. It only takes a couple of minutes, and it will really help us make sure that we're improving our engagement with you and giving you the most helpful information. So it'll be great if you could just spend a few minutes of your time to complete that. So now, without further delay, I will pass over to Natalie.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Vicky. Good morning. My name is Natalie Penrose. I'm Head of Strategy for Community and Stakeholder Engagement, and I'll be taking you through the webinar this morning, explaining why being a good neighbour is so important to HS2 and what that means to our contractors out there on the ground. So moving on, I'm just going to give you an introduction to the strategic approach that we have at HS2 and start to introduce you to some of the commitments we've made in this area. So you'll hear me say being a good neighbour a lot this morning, and it is one of our strategic objectives at HS2. It's really important to the project. This is all about our reputation and also our legacy. So no matter how safely we build the railway and how quickly we build the railway and how efficiently we build the railway, people will remember how we behave. And that's why this commitment is so important to us. It's building the railway with respect and empathy to the communities that we're impacting. And just to set a bit of context around this, it's important to remember that along that 350 miles of railway, no one chose to live next to HS2. And we have to have that in mind as we're working in those communities and with those communities. So we've made the commitment. We've said that we're going to be a good neighbour every single day of the project. And how have we articulated that? So I'm going to talk you through the sort of promises we've made around this being a good neighbour objective. So just to start off, we have got a strategy, and that's a really important document for us. That really sets out what our aim is and how we seek to behave every day of the project. And that's one of the links that Vicky will be sending around after today, so you can take a look at the document itself. This document has been around for a while. It was published at the end of 2017, and it really is our framework or blueprint in terms of how we work every day in the project. And just in the middle of this slide, we've got sort of 4 different ways that we engage with our communities and stakeholders. And I think it's really important to say that there are different ways. You know, this is a big project. It's a lot of people. It's going to be there for a long time. This isn't a consultation exercise. This is a 2-way dialogue, a relationship we're going to have with these people for a long period of time. So the 4 different ways of engagement are set out there for you. I mean, they're fairly self-explanatory, but I'll just do a quick run through. One key way we engage is to inform. It sounds fairly obvious, but people want to be kept informed about what's happening in their communities. And I'll be talking a bit about that later on in terms of what that means and what it looks like on the ground. So that's just giving them the information they need. There is a consulting element to how we engage. Now, phase 1 of this project, London to Birmingham, the consultation has largely happened on that part of the railway. It's sort of locked in and we've started building. Further north than Birmingham on the phase 2B part of the project, we still are in formal consultation stage. So that's where we're asking the public their views, and we have to legally take account of those views. So there is a consultation part of how we engage, which is a very formal way of engagement. Moving on to involving. We try very hard to make sure we're not just informing, that we're involving people as well. So we're listening to what they're telling us and we're acting on that feedback. And then the responding element, that's getting back to them. That's a key part of our promise, that we won't just listen and inform, we will actually get back to them and say, this is what we did about it. And I'm going to talk to you a bit later on about our help desk and our complaints process. And they are really key ways that we do that responding part of engagement. Also in the strategy, we have 10 commitments. And you'll see those on the right hand side of your screen. I'm going to talk to you about some of those this morning, not all of them. And I'm going to talk to you about the ones that are most relevant to our contractors and supply chain, so you can see the sort of commitments that we'll be asking of people who work with us. And just at the bottom of this slide, to start to finish on this one, we do have a corporate KPI around being a good neighbour. And that is around, we're aiming for 60% of people recognising that we're being a good neighbour. And you might think, oh, that's not very ambitious. That should be a lot higher. But at the moment, we're sort of currently tracking at around 43% of people saying we're being a good neighbour. And I share that with you to make the point again that people didn't choose to live next to this project. A lot of people are unhappy that the project is in their neighbourhood and is impacting on their day-to-day lives. We run surveys regularly. We ran a survey about a year or so ago where we asked people, have you done any of the following things in the last few months? And we asked that question of people who live a mile either side of the line of route. And in that group, around 20% of people said they'd actively campaigned against HS2 in the last 2 months. So that's just to give you a bit of context why that KPI isn't more ambitious. We have a lot of people that we're trying to influence and work with who have very deep-seated views about the project and really will not be moved on whether we're being a good neighbour. So this is about us doing all we can, behaving in the right way, even though some of those people are opposed to the project and what we're trying to do. So I'm just going to move on now and talk a little bit more about how the strategy works in practice. Again, these are some links that we will send you after the webinar that might help you put some flesh onto what I'm talking about today. The document you can see on the left, the progress report, the pink report, we publish these every 6 months, and this is our way of showing to the public and our stakeholders how we're delivering on the commitments in the strategy that I've just talked about. The reports are structured around the 10 commitments, and we share case studies and stats that demonstrate what we've done to keep our promise. We also talk in the report about what we think we need to do better and what we're aiming to do in the 6 months that follow. So if you want to have a look at what some of our staff and contractors are doing in this space, that's a good document to take a look at to get some ideas. And I will share some case studies from that later on this morning. And one of the other things that communities tell us frequently when we ask their opinion is, yeah, the strategy is great, and yeah, you know, it's good to see what your national ambition is. But what I really want to know is what does HS2 mean for me? You know, obviously people are concerned about, well, what's happening in my village? What's happening in my county? What will I see in the next 6 to 12 months? So to make sure that we're giving that sort of local information, we've got local area plans, and again, these are available online, and we'll share the links to them so you can see what the project looks like locally and what the coming period looks like in those local areas. We also have some community websites where people can also access this sort of information, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on as well. I'm just going to move on now, and I'm going to talk about who we engage with, so you've got a sense of sort of who our key audiences are and who we're trying to be a good neighbour to. So again, it's a big project. You know, this isn't an engagement exercise where we're talking to a town, a village or a city. We're talking to 350 miles of the country. So this is a huge engagement challenge. We think it's probably the biggest engagement challenge in the UK today, and will be for some time. And just to give you a sense of what that means in terms of people, that's 500,000 addresses located within a kilometre either side of the railway. So that's a lot of people we need to be talking to. Some of those people don't particularly want to talk to us, either because they're opposed to the project or they're not that interested. But there are a lot of people who are. So we are talking to a big proportion of that 500,000 all the time. And obviously, those are the key people we're trying to talk to. And the key ways that we talk to them are through our community engagement teams. So we do have community engagement teams who are based along that 350 miles. They're local people by and large. We've recruited people who are local, who understand the local area, who know the local groups. And in normal times, when we're not in lockdown or dealing with a pandemic, they're out there dealing with people, talking to them about concerns they have, land and property issues. They hold regular drop-ins where people can pop in and have a chat to them about anything that's on their minds. At the moment, they're doing a lot of that virtually, but they are there and they are based locally, and they are a key way for us to be a good neighbour to the people that we're impacting. We also have a help desk, so that's a national help desk. It's based normally in our Birmingham office, our head office, and again, they're sort of local people that we've recruited from the West Midlands area. They are very knowledgeable. We've invested a lot in training them so that they can deal with the queries that come into that help desk. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later, as it's a key way of us demonstrating we're being a good neighbour. And then also on this slide, you know, it's not just the people, the local people who are impacted by the project that we're trying to be a good neighbour to. We've got a lot of stakeholders as well. A lot of people are interested in HS2. A lot of people have got an interest in the project, not just in terms of the disruption it will bring, also in terms of the benefits. And again, I'm going to talk a bit about the benefits side of the project later on. So you can see there's a political element of our engagement, both at a national level. We've got a new HS2 minister who's been appointed, who has a huge interest in the project and is asking us lots of questions and is very engaged. And that's an MP called Andrew Stevenson. We've got the line of route MPs and local authorities. And also, just to be aware that we have an independent commissioner on the resident and construction side. So our residents commissioner is a lady called Debbie Fazan, and the construction commissioner is Sir Mark Worthington. And again, a bit like the minister on the left-hand side of the slide, their job is to hold us to account. It's their job to ask us questions and make sure that we're delivering on what we should. And they have regular reports that they publish, and we respond to those reports formally. And just to finish on this slide, above those sort of national and local authority groups, there are a lot of additional groups that sit underneath that. So you have local residents groups, parish councils, planning forums, and we're out all the time talking to these people. So it's a big exercise is what I'm trying to get across. A lot of people who are interested in the project, a lot of people who have questions about the project, and we're out there constantly engaging with this group. So I'm going to move on now. And I'm going to start to delve down a bit into our community commitments, which I talked about right at the start. I'm not going to go through all 10. They're out there in the documents that I've talked about for you to have a look at if you really want to delve into that detail. What I'm going to do is talk to you about some of the commitments that are most relevant to our contractors, and where we might be asking you to participate if you were to work with us. So the first commitment I'm going to talk to you about this morning is Community Commitment 3. And you remember right at the start, I talked about the 4 different ways that we engage, and one of them was informing. That was the first way that we try and be a good neighbour. So what this commitment is about is letting the communities who are impacted by the project know what's happening in their area. It's the number one thing people tell us that they're interested in. Tell us what's happening so we know what to expect. That might be because they're worried about noise. It might be because they're worried about vibration. It might be because they're worried about traffic and transport impacts in their area. So this is the key thing that people want to know about. And I talked earlier about the local area plans. They're fairly static. You know, they look sort of 12 months in advance and give a very high level view of what people can expect over the coming year. Where we're able to give more up-to-date information is on our websites. So on the left-hand side of the screen there, you've got some facts and figures. These stats up until the end of December last year. We have 14 websites. So these are 14 community websites that are locally based. You can go onto those websites and find out about works that are coming up in your area. And you can also subscribe to these websites. And if you subscribe to them, you'll get alerts. And those alerts will tell you what you can expect to see over coming weeks, not just in terms of disruption, but also in terms of some of the positive things that are happening, like this sort of webinar today. So at the moment, we've got 300,000 visits. We're just coming up to that milestone, and we've got around 7,000 subscribers. And like I said, at the moment, particularly as we're hampered in terms of how much we're able to do face-to-face out in communities, the community websites are really critical to us in terms of being able to talk to people, inform them and let them know what's going on. So I'm just going to move on and give you a case study to describe what this means for our contractors. You've got an image there, that's HS2 in Warwickshire, but all of the community websites have got that sort of section where you can go on and have a look at what's happening locally. But the case study is really about us trying to do more than just push information out through mail shots or through the website. You know, we've had feedback from communities that in itself isn't enough. That's fine and it's all good, but we need to do more, find different channels and different routes to let people know what's going on and what they can expect. So the case study here was just about us using social media more widely and putting that sort of information up on Facebook and Twitter, etc., just to let people know there is going to be some change and disruption in your area over the next 2 weeks, and this is what it might look like. In terms of finding different ways to let people know what's going on, we also, particularly, you know, when we're not in COVID and we're not in lockdown, we've done things like door knocking, just telling people, knocking on the door and saying this is what you can expect. We've stood outside tube stations with leaflets, etc. So what this commitment is really about is making sure we're doing all we can to let people know what's coming up and finding as many routes as possible so that we reach as many people as possible. So it's a key commitment. It's something that we work very closely with our main contractors on to make sure that we're getting that information out as quick as we can, as accurate as we can, and as well as we can. So that's community commitment 3. I'm going to go on and talk about community commitment 4. Now, this is a really important commitment for us, and it's a big commitment. We have promised that we will have a free phone helpline available every single day of the year, and that's 24/7. So you can ring this helpline, it'll cost you no money, and you'll get an answer whatever time you ring. If you ring at 2 o'clock in the morning on Christmas Eve, you'll get an answer. Someone will pick up the phone. So this is a really important way that we demonstrate that we're being a good neighbour, that we're always there, we're available to listen. If you've got any question or concern, we will try and answer that any time of the day or night. We have, as I said earlier, a team who are normally based in our head office in Birmingham, who are our help desk. Currently, they're working remotely, but they're a very expert team. We've invested a lot in training them. So whether you're ringing up about local works, as we just talked about, or a land and property query, or the programme, what you might expect in the next 2 years in a particular area, we make sure that they're able to deal with that sort of question. The help desk is getting busier. So as the project gains pace, and more construction is visible to communities along the line of route, we're seeing the number of people who are calling this help desk going up. And alongside that, we've done quite a lot of work to drive up awareness of the help desk so that people know that it's available, that it's free and it's there all the time. The figures are up until December last year, and that's a 6-month period. So in that 6-month period in 2019, we got nearly 18,000 queries. And as I say, numbers are up. We're currently expecting in 2020 to get around 35 to 40,000 queries this year. So it's quite busy. It's quite a busy line. And sometimes people are ringing up with sort of very speculative questions, and sometimes it's very, very specific questions about them. And moving on, I'm just going to give you a little bit more detail about the help desk. You've got the numbers there on the right hand side if you want to test it yourself and ask us some questions. And as well as the phone, we've got a mini-com, and you can also email and ask them questions if you don't want to talk over the phone. And at the moment, it's about 50-50 in terms of those volumes. So around half of the people who choose to contact us do so by phone, and around half do so by email. The figure in the middle on the left-hand side is probably the important one. Again, this is up until December. At that time, we were answering and resolving completely 60% of inquiries at the first contact. So that means someone rang us, we took the inquiry and resolved it there and then. We were able to give them the answer and they went away, and that was the call closed. Around 40% at that time, we were having to follow up. So we didn't have the answer then and there, and we needed to go away and find out the answer and get back to them. At the moment, we're resolving around 2/3 at the first attempt, and we're only needing to follow up on around 1/3 of calls. And this is an area where we do expect our contractors to work with us and the supply chain to work with us. Some of those calls that we can't answer at the first attempt sometimes relate to a contract, and we do need to go out to our suppliers and our contractors to ask them for more information so that we can resolve that call. So this is an area where we do work very collaboratively with the people that we contract with, so that we can deliver a really high quality service through the help desk. And that's the ultimate aim with this. You know, like I say, it's a key way we're trying to be a good neighbour. This service has to be world class, and that's what we're aiming for with the help desk. If we move on, I'll talk a little bit about the more positive sides of the project. So I talked earlier about nobody choosing to live next to HS2. And we do have to be a good neighbour and be very conscious of that issue when we're out talking to people. And commitment 7 kind of speaks to that challenge that we have. We've promised that we will leave a positive and sustainable legacy for the communities that are impacted by HS2. So this is about giving something back during the project so they see some positivity, but it's also about leaving a legacy. So it's not just being positive while we're in construction, it's leaving something that they can say HS2 did benefit me. Obviously, there's benefits for local business and jobs, but what we also try and do is more than that. So just sticking at a national level before I start to give you some case studies that are more tailored. On the left-hand side, you've got some information about something called the Community Environment Fund. And this is a fund, it's a national fund that people who live along the line of route can apply for. At the moment, it only applies between London and Birmingham. But if you live in that corridor, you are able to apply for funding. At the moment, we're above £5 million has been given out to local communities to help them with local projects. Now, sometimes they're relatively small amounts of money to enable them to get something off the ground that they're trying to trial. Sometimes they've been bigger sums of money, sort of £100,000 to transform community centres, put in additional buildings and facilities so that they can serve more members of the local community, for example. So that's a key way that we're trying to give something back and help the communities that have been impacted by HS2. And what I'm going to do now is give you some case studies of our contractors really living up to this commitment and showing how they are leaving a positive legacy and helping the communities that they operate in. So this first one is from Langmurphy, one of our early works contractors who've been working in the Birmingham area, so the north part of the first phase of the railway. So this case study is about LM working with a Birmingham-based charity called Suited for Success, and they've partnered up with this charity to give back as much as they can, really. They've done some practical things like giving clothing, suits, shoes, etc. to people who are long-term unemployed and are really struggling to get into the workplace. They've also worked with Suited for Success to provide their expertise in how to job hunt, CVs, how to present yourself at interviews and how to make the best of the skills and experience you've got. So this is an example of LM finding a local partner, working with them and giving something back as part of their community investment approach. So I'm going to move on and give you an example from a different part of the route. This is an example in Camden, but this is Costain Skanska. Who've been working in the Camden Euston area for some time. And this is an example of what they did during a winter period, a very cold winter period, about a year and a half ago. They had some property around the Regent's Park estate that was empty as a result of the work they were doing to prepare this area for construction. And rather than just leave that sort of area empty and not utilise it, they worked with a local charity to put a temporary homeless shelter in place. And it wasn't just somewhere to sleep. It was where they were able to provide support, advice, guidance, and try and help the people who made use of this facility find more stability in their lives. So they were able to provide shelter to 26 people. But I think the most impressive thing from this example was 5 of those people that they worked with were able to find full-time accommodation and employment as a result of the support that was put in place through this investment locally. So that's an example of how our contractor thought outside the box a bit, used facilities they had, partnered with someone who was expert, and made a real difference to people in that area. And just moving on to another case study, going back to Birmingham. This is another Lang Murphy example. This is a building that some of you might have seen if you've ever travelled into New Street Station by train. It was in the area that's now been cleared for the development of Curzon Street Station in Birmingham. And this was student accommodation that was being demolished to make way for the construction that needs to happen there. This student accommodation had a lot of furniture in it that was going to be destroyed, that was perfectly serviceable. And again, LM worked with Birmingham City Council to find ways this furniture could be put to good use rather than destroyed. And this furniture was provided to homeless shelters. So you had beds and desks, etc., that went to good homes. So again, thinking outside the box a bit, making sure that we don't waste and making sure that we give something back. And the last commitment I'm going to talk to you about this morning is our complaints process. So again, this is an area where we do have to work closely and collaboratively with our supply chain, a bit like the help desk. So the help desk is there to deal with quick queries, people picking the phone up and saying, I want an answer to this. Sometimes people have got a complaint, so it's not just a straightforward inquiry. There's more that they want us to look at and resolve for them. So we've pledged that any complaints we'll deal with within 20 working days, and if possible, we'll deal with it sooner than that. And we do deal with the great majority quicker than 20 working days. We have a complaints team who are specialist complaints handlers, and they work with the business and supply chain to really make sure we're answering and understanding complaints that come into the business. So moving on, I'll just give you a few facts and figures around this. Numbers are going up. So again, these are numbers, the latest published figures up until the end of December. But this year in 2020, basically complaints have doubled, more than doubled actually. So we are getting larger volumes in. A big chunk of those this year have been around COVID and us continuing construction during COVID. So that was in line with government advice around construction, but members of the public really quite concerned about us being operational, particularly during the March-April period. But it's not just about COVID. We are getting complaints about noise disruption, traffic, the most common things that we get contacted about. Sometimes we get contacted about contractor or supply chain behaviour, and certainly during the COVID period, we had people contacting us saying they were unhappy about how people behaved, perhaps in local shops or villages, and felt they weren't being safe or considerate. So again, going back to the being a good neighbour piece, what is all this about? This is about us being considerate to the communities that we're in, and really displaying those good neighbour behaviours, whatever you're doing, particularly if you're visible and working with the communities who are impacted. We do have some corporate KPIs around complaints, as you would expect, as most organisations do. And despite the high volumes, we are still achieving those. So we do resolve at the moment 97% of complaints within 20 working days, which does mean our contractors have to be very responsive for us to achieve that target. When we're asking them for information, they need to come back to us very quickly so that we can achieve this standard. And in terms of resolving them for the members of the public, we do resolve 99% of the first attempt. So that means the member of the public gets a response from us, and that's it. They don't pursue the issue. So we think the complaint service, again, is very necessary to demonstrate we're being a good neighbour. And like the help desk, our aim is that this is really high standard, world-class service. So that's the end from me today. I hope I've explained to you why being a good neighbour is so important to HS2, that it is all about our reputation and it's also about our legacy. Anyone who works with us, we will expect them to live up to these standards. And I hope I've given you a flavour of what that means in practice. So that's the end from me, and I'll hand back to Victoria to pick up any questions from this morning.
Brilliant, thank you. so much, Natalie. That was really helpful. And I think for us, from a business point of view, I think it's really important for potential suppliers to be thinking about some of these things and thinking about how they can help us to deliver on our commitments, and also it's a way that you can really show off and stand out as a business when you're going through that procurement process with some of the things that Natalie's mentioned around kind of working with communities and making sure that you're keeping them informed and being a bit more proactive around that element of stuff. So questions, we've had a few questions through. I think I'm going to start with one which is quite relevant and quite broad, and it's around how as an organisation we're maintaining and adapting and continuing to support and engage with communities whilst we're kind of under the restrictions of COVID-19. So how are we changing the way that we're doing things to enable us to continue to reach our commitments?
Yeah, it's a good question. Obviously, it was a massive challenge for us when lockdown happened in March. The nature of what we do, traditionally we've done a huge percentage face-to-face. So as I was saying at the start, we've got community engagement staff out and about along the line of route who would usually be holding drop-ins, once a month so that people could come and talk to them. They'd go out to people's homes for a chat if they had something really difficult that they wanted to talk through. So we haven't been able to do any of that. So we had to do a number of things to sort of switch our resource so that we were able to keep this regular engagement going. Our first probably really practical challenge was to get our help desk away from our head office in Birmingham. So, they are usually office based, they do work together, and we had to make sure that we could keep that 24/7 service going without any disruption. And we did. It didn't stop at any point, and we didn't need to restrict it at any point, but we did have to shift that part of our service to a home working arrangement very quickly. So that was our first very practical challenge, and that's now been sort of put to bed and works fine. In terms of then sort of more of our business as usual engagement, it's been switching as much as possible to digital platforms. So it's doing webinars like this, holding sort of regular meetings that we would have with residents groups or local authorities. We now hold those digitally, either through a webinar format or through Microsoft Teams or Skype. And we're doing more virtually and digitally. For example, at the moment, there are some works in Great Missenden, in the middle part of the London to Birmingham route, and that information is all on Commonplace, our community websites, as it would normally be. But there's now a virtual exhibition space as well, where you can sort of walk into a virtual exhibition room and click on parts of the room and get different information. So it's forced us to do things differently, but it's been a positive in many ways, because it's pushed us quicker and further to do more digital engagement than perhaps we would have in 2020 had we not been forced to. So I'd say watch this space. We've done a lot, but it's an area for development for us to do even more online.
Brilliant, thank you. So there's been questions around what's expected from suppliers and contractors who are maybe further down the supply chain. Are they expected to come along and support at any engagement events or activity, or is it a case of just making sure that they are providing us with the information about what's going on, and how can they get more involved and more proactive in that space?
Yeah, I'd say probably no hard and fast rules. So our main contractors, whether they're enabling works or main works, we do expect them to do frontline engagement. So if we're talking to communities and holding events, yes, we would expect them to be there and present and talking to the public in a front-facing way. We'd be expecting those contractors to be contributing to the content on our community websites, etc. And they do a lot of work to respond to complaints and inquiries. Subcontractors in the wider supply chain, it will vary depending on the nature of that contract. So if you had a contract where you needed to inform the public about something that was happening, then we would probably expect something quite hands-on from you. If we were getting complaints and inquiries about a service you were delivering that was very visible, that people had some issues with, we would expect you to engage with us in responding to those questions and complaints. So it is variable. What I would say is the principles that I've talked about today, the being a good neighbour, how we behave, the 10 commitments, we expect everyone to embrace that, but in a way that makes sense for the contract they hold.
Brilliant. I think that leads nicely into the next question we've had around responding to inquiries can be quite a burden, particularly for smaller businesses. So what are the kind of expectations from HS2 in terms of the timeframes and turnarounds for the smaller companies to get the information that we need to answer the inquiries?
Well, with the inquiries, we try and resolve as many as we can at the first point of contact. And at the moment, we do 2/3 of those without needing to talk to anybody. We have the information available and can deal with those. For the inquiries or even complaints where we just don't have the detail about what the person has an issue with, we would have to go out to the supplier. Generally, that would be through our main contractors. That is usually what people have got issues with. It's usually to do with construction, and it's usually very practical questions about a site safety, noise, lights, traffic. So those are the people who would generally be picking up inquiries. We do have sometimes inquiries about very specific contracts. So to give you an example from my part of the world, I've got some contracts with researchers who conduct research for us with communities, asking them whether we're being a good neighbour and testing whether we're being a good neighbour. Occasionally we've had questions to the help desk about some of the research we're doing, and if I can't answer that, then I would be talking to my suppliers directly to say, I need you to help me with this response. The target is 20 working days, so it's not an overnight turnaround. We do try and resolve them as quick as we can, but there is a bit of time to do that. And I say we do try and do them ourselves, and certainly for my contracts, I would answer them if I can. But there have been occasions where I've needed to go to them and say, I need you to give me a bit more detail on this one.
Brilliant, thank you. So the next question's more broadly around kind of HS2 and where the project's at in terms of that engagement piece of, you mentioned the informing, involving, responding and the consultation. So in terms of the consultation element, where is that happening along the route? Is that still happening across the whole route? And at what stage is that at for the areas where that's being undertaken?
Yeah, so formal consultation in the true sort of legal sense of the word has finished for phase 1. So London to Birmingham, we are not consulting with the public about that part of the route anymore. There are some parts of that route where we're involving them in decisions where there is still some scope for change. So that isn't formal consultation about, is the route going ahead? Is it going through this village? That's all finished. But there are some questions that we can involve the public with around things like design. So recently, as an example, we have been asking the public for their views on the design of a viaduct in Warwickshire, where there is still some scope to influence that design. So that's the type of involvement that we have between London and Birmingham. As you go further north, the 2B part of the route, that still isn't set in stone. So that part of the route is still subject to formal consultation. So that is where people can really have more of a say in the route of that railway. So that is the only part where we're still in that, it's up for grabs. And when we're out for formal consultation on phase 2B, that's quite a big exercise. So we will have sort of a range of events where people can come normally face to face and look at maps and talk to experts and ask questions about what it really means, where is the scope that they can influence and change the project, and people can also do that online and in writing. And certainly collating the responses to that consultation is a big exercise. We had thousands and thousands of responses to that type of consultation, and we work with an independent company. In the past it's been Ipsos Mori, to make sure that we're dealing with those concerns in the right legal way, as you would in any consultation.
Brilliant, thank you. And that brings me to a question we've had from Paul, who runs a video photography drone company that can help, I guess, show the progress of the project. It can help inform consultation and also make sure and demonstrate compliance as a project. What opportunities are there for businesses such as this to get involved in the project and engaging with communities using that kind of, I guess, that virtual material and videos to kind of help showcase what we're doing as a project?
Yeah, it's a good question, and you know, we've always used sort of imagery, videos to demonstrate all sorts of things, not just about what we're planning, but the impact we're having and the type of engagement we're doing. Now it's even more important than ever because we're doing so much digitally and virtually. Those sorts of materials are increasingly important to us. So I would say get in touch via Vicky probably after this session.
Yeah, absolutely. And there'll definitely be opportunities, particularly in phase one with the contractors. There are contractors out there looking for, you know, drone footage and video footage, photography as well. So we'll get in touch with you after this to kind of follow that up a bit more in a bit more detail for you. So we're nearing the end of the session, so I was just going to finish with a last question around where can businesses find out more about the commitments, including the ones that obviously you haven't had time to touch on today, and any further information around some of the funds, the community funds, and the things that we're looking for from them.
Yeah, so I would say when you get the contact from Vicky after this morning, you will have a link to the strategy. So I'd say look at the strategy, the 10 commitments are in there, and you'll find more information about what they mean. You'll also get a link to our public progress reports. So please do take a look at those because that does bring it to life a bit more. So for each of the commitments, there's some case studies and also some facts and figures. So you'll be able to see, well, what that commitment is translating to on the ground. So I'd say those are the key documents to have a look at. And then if you're interested in what's happening more locally in your area, I would log on to the community websites, have a look. There's a lot of information on there about what's going on, and you can subscribe on those community websites as well. And you can also subscribe with Victoria if you haven't already done so, as one of our local businesses who wants to work with us.
Brilliant, thank you. So I think we will end on that note. So I want to say thank you very much for your time today, Natalie, but also thank you for everyone who has listened in for us today. There are questions that we haven't had time to get to, so we will be sending out a questions and answer sheet to following this event to all attendees, so you will get the answer to any question that we haven't had time to reach. And if you haven't done so already, remember to sign up for the next week webinar on health and safety. We hope to see you there, and thank you very much. We will now close the session.